I arrived at the Larchmont Bluffs estate exactly 12 minutes early. That tiny slice of time was all it took to turn my 11-year marriage into a crime scene. Standing outside the glass doors, I heard my husband laughing, bragging that he would trade me for my best friend like a used car. He thought he was safe behind closed doors, but he did not know he was handing me the weapon I would use to bury him in court. My name is Harper Caldwell. I am 34 years old, and I live in the pristine, manicured suburbs just outside Providence, Rhode Island. For 11 years, I believed my marriage to Ethan Pierce was a masterpiece of stability. We were efficient. We were compatible. We operated like a Swiss watch, every gear turning in perfect synchronization. I built my life around the certainty of us. But watches break, and sometimes you do not realize the mechanism has failed until you look down and see that the hands have stopped moving. It was the night before New Year's Eve. The air outside was biting, the kind of Rhode Island cold that seeps through the glass. Ethan and I were driving to his parents' estate in Larchmont Bluffs for their annual holiday gathering. The drive usually took 40 minutes. About halfway there, Ethan tapped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. "Let's take the shoreline route," he said, his voice tight. "The lights on the bay are supposed to be nice tonight. I checked the dashboard clock. It is freezing." "Ethan, plus, your mother explicitly said 7 o'clock. If we take the shore road, we will be 20 minutes late. It's just family." "Harper," he snapped, uncharacteristically irritable. "No," I said, closing the navigation app on my phone. "Stick to the highway." He sighed, a sharp exhalation of frustration, but he kept the car on the interstate, because I insisted on efficiency. We pulled into the long, gravel driveway of the Pierce estate exactly 12 minutes early. I did not know it then, but those 12 minutes were the difference between my life as I knew it and the wreckage I was about to inhabit. The driveway was already lined with cars, but they were not the usual family SUVs. They were black sedans, polished and severe. Inside, the house did not feel like a holiday party. It felt like a boardroom meeting that had been hastily disguised with a few wreaths. There were men in dark suits standing in tight clusters, speaking in low tones. When my mother-in-law greeted us, her smile did not reach her eyes. It was a glazed, ceramic expression, the kind she wore when she was assessing a bad investment. "Harper," she said, offering a cheek that felt like marble. "You are early." Traffic was light. I replied. Ethan checked his phone, ignoring his mother. "I need to take this. Work emergency. You go in. Harper, I will find you in a second." It was the first time in 11 years he had separated from me the moment we arrived at his parents' house. Usually, we were a united front. I watched him disappear down the West Wing corridor, phone pressed to his ear. The air in the foyer felt thin, suffocating. I grabbed a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and decided to find him. I told myself I was just being helpful, but deep down, my instincts were humming with a low-grade alarm. I walked down the hallway lined with portraits of Pierce ancestors, their painted eyes seeming to track my movements. The house was quiet in this wing, the noise of the party fading behind me. I heard a low murmur coming from the sunroom at the end of the hall, a glass-walled space that looked out over the frozen garden. The door was slightly ajar. I recognized Ethan's voice immediately. He was not shouting. He was laughing. It was a soft, dismissive sound. She will have to accept it. Or if she doesn't, well, I have Sloane. I stopped. My breath caught in my throat. Sloane Hart, my best friend since college, the woman who had stood beside me at my wedding, the woman I texted every single morning, hearing her name in his mouth, spoken with such casual possession, felt like a physical blow to the sternum. He spoke of her not as a person, but as an insurance policy, a replacement part. I stood frozen in the shadow of the doorframe, my hand hovering inches from the wood. I tried to process the data. Ethan and Sloane. The logic refused to settle. Then, A woman's voice cut through the silence. It was not Sloane. It was sharper, colder, and terrifyingly calm. The plan has to accelerate. Ethan, the timeline changed. I'm pregnant. The world tilted. The hallway seemed to stretch and warp. I stared at the sliver of light coming through the crack in the door. Ethan was not just leaving me, he was erasing me. He had a contingency plan involving my best friend, and now he had a baby on the way with a woman whose voice sounded like she was negotiating a merger. My instinct was to kick the door open, to scream, to demand an audit of his soul. But I looked at my hand, trembling in the air. If I walked in there now, I would be the hysterical wife. I would be the emotional wreckage they could sweep away. I lowered my hand. I took a step back, then another. My heels made no sound on the thick Persian runner. I did not enter the room. I did not confront them. I turned around and walked back toward the front door, my mind racing, calculating, filing away every syllable I had just heard. I was leaving the scene of the crime before the criminals even knew I was there. I walked out of the estate with the keys to Ethan's Mercedes clutched in my hand. I always kept the spare set in my purse, a habit born from efficiency, but tonight it felt like theft. I did not run. I did not look back at the illuminated windows where my husband was currently dismantling our marriage. I simply got into the driver's seat, adjusted the mirrors, and drove away. The engine purred, a smooth, expensive sound that contrasted violently with the chaos rattling inside my skull. I did not go home. Home was the first place he would look, and I was not ready to be found. I drove straight into downtown Providence and checked into a serviced apartment building that catered to corporate travelers, paying for a week up front with my own card. My phone began to vibrate before I even reached the highway. It buzzed against the center console like an angry insect. The screen lit up with names that used to mean family. Ethan, then Margaret Pierce, my mother-in-law, then Derek, his brother. I glanced at the preview messages flashing on the lock screen. Not a single one asked if I was safe. Not one asked why I had left. Where did you go? The guests are asking. You are making a scene by being absent. Harper, pick up. This looks bad for us. They were not worried about me. They were worried about the optics. They were worried about the gap in the family photo. I pulled over onto the shoulder of the exit ramp, my hands trembling slightly on the wheel. I typed a single reply to Ethan. When you are ready to tell the truth, speak through a lawyer. I hit send and immediately powered off the phone. The screen went black, and for the first time in hours, the silence felt real. I sat in the sterile, beige living room of the rented apartment. I did not cry. I think my body was in shock, bypassing grief and moving straight to survival mode. I sat by the window, watching the city lights, and suddenly, the last 6 months of my life began to rearrange themselves. The signs had been there, scattered like breadcrumbs I had been too trusting to follow. The new cologne that smelled of cedar and citrus too trendy for him. The way he started placing his phone face down on the dinner table. The sudden dedication to the gym at 6 a.m. The short business trips to Boston that never required an overnight bag but always left him exhausted. I had called it dedication. He had been building a separate world. I forced myself to eat a granola bar I found in my purse. I chewed mechanically, swallowing without tasting. One word kept pulsing in my mind, rhythmic and demanding truth. I opened my laptop. I did not open a journal to write about my feelings. I opened a spreadsheet. I named the file Dissolution. I created columns date, lie, reality, cost. It felt like I was an auditor walking through the wreckage of a plane crash, tagging the debris. I logged into our joint bank accounts. I started scrolling backward. The first anomaly jumped out at me within minutes. It was a recurring monthly transfer labeled Harbor Slate Workspaces. Ethan had told me he rented a private desk at a co-working space to focus on his consulting projects. He said it was for networking. I highlighted the line item, $3,400 a month. My fingers flew across the keyboard, searching for Harbor Slate. It was not a co-working space. It was a luxury residential building on the waterfront. $3,400 was not the price of a desk. It was the price of a one-bedroom apartment. He wasn't networking. He was nesting. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands remained steady. I dug deeper. I found a payment to a credit card issuer I did not recognize. It was paid automatically from our savings account, disguised under a generic label that looked like a utility bill, but the merchant code was wrong. I traced it. It was a platinum card in Ethan's name, a card I did not know existed. I managed to access the transaction history through a shared password manager he had forgotten to update. The screen filled with a list of purchases that painted a picture of a life I wasn't part of. Dinners for two at steakhouses I had never visited. A weekend retreat in Vermont when he said he was at a conference. Jewelry store purchases. I stared at the glowing screen. I could have screamed. I could have thrown the laptop against the wall. But I didn't. Rage is useless unless it is focused. Confronting him now would only give him the chance to lie, to gaslight me, to spin a story about how I was crazy. No, I whispered to the empty room. I won't ask you. I would not ask him a single question. I would follow the money. The money was the only thing in this marriage that still had the decency to tell the truth, and I was going to let it tell me the entire story before I ever let him speak again. I sat at the small desk in the serviced apartment, the blue light of the laptop screen casting long, sharp shadows across my face. I was no longer Harper the wife. I was Harper the forensic analyst. I downloaded the bank statements for the last 9 months, the files downloading with a cheerful little ping that sounded obscenely upbeat for the devastation they contained. I opened the spreadsheet and began to filter. I sorted by category: fine dining, hotels, luxury gifts, car rentals. The pattern emerged instantly, like invisible ink held over a flame. The nights Ethan claimed he was pulling all-nighters at the office coincided perfectly with charges at steakhouses in Boston and boutique hotels in Newport. But the real smoking gun was a recurring transfer. On the 15th of every month, exactly $2,900 left our joint savings account and went to a payee labeled Visa Platinum P. I did not know this card. We had a joint Visa and an Amex. This was new. I traced the origination date. He had opened it 8 months ago. I managed to access the transaction details through the linked banking profile he had carelessly left logged in on the cloud. The list of purchases made me nauseous. $1,850 for a diamond tennis bracelet. I looked at my bare wrist. I had never seen that bracelet. $600 for a couple's massage at a spa I had been begging him to take me to for years. 2 business-class tickets to Miami for a weekend. He told me he was at a strategy retreat in the Berkshires. I opened a new tab and typed in a search query, Rhode Island divorce law spending assets on affair. The legal term popped up immediately. Dissipation of marital assets. Dissipation of marital assets. I read the phrase aloud, testing the weight of it on my tongue. It sounded like a weapon. I highlighted the term in my notes. This was not just betrayal. It was theft. I needed to know how deep the hole went. I navigated to a credit monitoring site and paid the fee to pull my full report. The wheel spun for a few seconds before the dashboard loaded. My breath hitched. There, sitting at the top of the active accounts list, was a home equity line of credit for $60,000 against our house in Larchmont Bluffs. No, I whispered, clicking on the details. That is impossible. I pulled up the digital loan documents stored in the bank's archive. I scrolled to the bottom of the PDF. There, in black ink, was Ethan's signature, and right beside it was mine. Harper Caldwell Pierce. I stared at the loop of the P. It was a good forgery, but it was too perfect, lacking the slight jaggedness of my natural hand. I looked at the date stamp on the electronic notary seal. October 12th. October 12th, I said, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and clarity. I was at the dentist. I remembered it vividly because I had a root canal that afternoon. I was in a chair with my mouth numb and a drill in my tooth at the exact moment this document claimed I was signing away $60,000 of equity. Then I remembered the week before that. Ethan had asked to borrow my driver's license. I need to update our auto insurance policy. Honey, he had said, smiling that charming, boyish smile. They need a scan of your ID. He hadn't updated the insurance. He had used my license to impersonate me and rob us blind. Identity theft, fraud, forgery. I grabbed my phone and took photos of the screen, capturing the metadata, the timestamps, and the IP addresses. I saved every PDF, every statement, and every image to an external hard drive and then uploaded them to a brand new cloud account with a password Ethan would never guess. Then, I went through every financial login I possessed and changed the passwords to a random string of characters. I was about to close the laptop when I saw a folder in his synced documents named Drafts. My curiosity pricked. I clicked it. There was a single file titled Letter to Counsel Strategy. I opened it. It was a letter addressed to a divorce attorney I didn't know. Regarding the separation, my primary concern is Harper's stability. She has been struggling with a severe gambling addiction for the past 2 years. The missing funds and the debts incurred were her doing, and I have been trying to cover for her to save her reputation. I believe this addiction makes her unfit for— I slammed the laptop shut, the sound cracking like a gunshot in the silent room. He wasn't just planning to leave me, he was planning to frame me. He was going to take the $60,000 he stole, the money he spent on his mistress, and pin it all on me as a gambling problem. You want to play a game. Ethan, I said to the empty room, my voice drop-dead cold. Fine, let's play. I sat across from Fallon Price in an office that felt less like a place for legal counsel and more like a surgical theater. The walls were floor-to-ceiling glass, overlooking the gray expanse of Boston Harbor. There were no tissues on the desk, no soft lighting, and absolutely no sympathy. Fallon was a woman made of sharp angles and tailored silk, and she flipped through my file with the precision of a card shark. Infidelity is common. Harper, it is messy, it is painful, but legally. It is often just noise, Fallon said, not looking up from the documents. She paused at the printout of the loan agreement, the one with my forged signature. She tapped the paper with a manicured fingernail. But this is not noise. This is a felony. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, not relief, but something harder. Adrenaline. So, we sue him for the money. Fallon finally looked at me. Her eyes were like ice. No, we do not just sue for money. We use this to own him. The leverage has shifted. This is no longer a negotiation about who gets the china. This is a negotiation about whether he wants to stay out of prison. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. Here is the strategy. We file for legal separation immediately. Not divorce yet. Separation allows us to file an emergency motion to freeze marital assets. It stops the bleeding. He won't be able to move a single dime without a court order. We keep him in a state of panic, thinking he might still have a chance to spin this, while we tighten the noose. He will try to call me, I said. He will try to explain. Let him try, Fallon replied smoothly. But you will not speak to him. Rule number 1, silence is your weapon. You do not argue. You do not post cryptic quotes on social media. You do not call his mother to cry. Every word you say to him can be twisted. Every word you write to him is evidence. We want evidence. She pulled up a file on her tablet. Now, let's talk about his employer, Marrowline Strategies. He is a senior consultant. I said, he is also subject to a very strict code of conduct. Fallon noted, scrolling through a digital document. I pulled their standard employment agreement. They have a zero-tolerance policy for undisclosed relationships between superiors and subordinates, and they have a morality clause regarding criminal conduct. I thought of Madison, the pregnant woman, the vice president. So we tell them no, Fallon said sharply. Not yet. That is the nuclear option. If we get him fired today, the income stream dries up, and you get nothing but a bankrupt ex-husband. We need him employed so he can pay what he owes. We keep HR in our back pocket. We only push that button if he refuses to settle on our terms." I left her office feeling lighter, but it was a cold, dangerous kind of lightness. I walked to my car and took my phone out. I unblocked Ethan's number. Almost immediately, it began to ring. His face flashed on the screen. I watched it, feeling absolutely nothing. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then, I typed the text Fallon had dictated. "All future communication must be directed to my attorney, Fallon Price." I hit send. 5 minutes later, my banking app pinged with a notification. A transfer had just been initiated from an external account. Deposit $5,000. I stared at the number. He was throwing money at me. He thought $5,000 was enough to make me quiet. He thought I was a problem he could pay off, like a parking ticket or a credit card bill. It was insulting. It was the frantic act of a man who realized he had lost control of the board. I did not touch the money. I did not reply to say thank you or go to hell. I simply closed the app. I realized then that I did not want to scream at him. I did not want to slash his tires or burn his clothes on the lawn. Those were messy, emotional reactions. I wanted something cleaner. I wanted to dismantle his life with the same cold efficiency he had used to dismantle mine. I would not take revenge with anger. I would take revenge with procedure. The knock on the door came on Tuesday morning. It was not the tentative knock of room service, but the heavy, authoritative pounding of a Pierce man. I checked the peephole and saw Derek, Ethan's older brother, standing in the hallway. He was wearing his expensive trench coat, looking around the corridor with a sneer of distaste, as if the air in the serviced apartment building might infect him with mediocrity. I opened the door but left the security chain engaged. "Harper," Derek said, his voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Open this door. You are making a scene." "I am not making a scene." "Derek," I said calmly, "I am making a transition. You are making the family look ridiculous," he snapped. "Ethan is worried sick. He told us about your episode. He says you are having a mental breakdown. He is telling everyone you are hysterical. Harper, that you are imagining things because of the stress of not having children." My grip on the door handle tightened until my knuckles turned white. So that was the narrative. The crazy wife defense. It was a classic move. If he could paint me as unstable, my testimony about his fraud and his infidelity would look like the ravings of a broken woman. He was weaponizing my fertility struggles against me. "He is telling people I am crazy," I asked. "He is saying you are confused," Derek said, his tone softening into a patronizing pity that was worse than his anger. "Just come home. Mom is willing to keep this quiet. We can get you help." I looked at him. I looked at the arrogance etched into his jawline, the absolute certainty that the Pierce reality was the only reality that mattered. "Ask him about the timeline." "Derek," I said. Derek blinked. "What, ask your brother about the timeline?" I repeated, my voice steady. "Ask him why the timeline changed." I slammed the door in his face and threw the deadbolt. I heard him calling my name for a minute, then the sound of his heavy footsteps retreating down the hall. I leaned against the door, my heart pounding, but I did not slide down to the floor in tears. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water. My phone lit up. It was a text from Margaret, my mother-in-law. "We are a family that forgives. Harper, whatever this outburst is, we can move past it. Ethan is willing to take you back despite the embarrassment you have caused. Do not let your pride destroy your security." She did not ask if I was hurt. She did not ask if what I found was true. She only offered forgiveness for the crime of exposing her son's sins. They were circling the wagons, protecting the brand. Then a new notification popped up, a name I had not expected to see. Sloane Hart. My stomach twisted. My best friend. The woman whose name Ethan had used like a poker chip. I almost deleted the message, but curiosity, the auditor's instinct, made me open it. "He is lying to both of us. Please, Harper. I am not who you think I am in this. I am being used as a shield. I stared at the screen. A shield. I typed back 2 words. Prove it. 3 bubbles appeared immediately, indicating she was typing fast. Then, an audio file appeared. He left me this voicemail 3 days ago. Before you found out. Listen to it. I pressed play. Ethan's voice filled the small apartment, smooth and confident. The voice of a man who thought he was untouchable. Hey, Sloan, look, I need you to do me a favor. Harper is getting restless. I need you to be the distraction. If she thinks I am leaving her for you, she will focus on the betrayal. Right. She will cry. She will get emotional. It keeps her eyes off the business side of things. It keeps her away from the real issue. Just play along if she calls you. Be the villain for a few weeks. If I push her hard enough, she will crack, and I can claim full custody of the house when the dust settles. It is cleaner this way. The recording ended. I sat there, frozen. He wasn't just cheating. He was orchestrating a psychological demolition. He wanted me to hate Sloan so I wouldn't look for the money. He wanted me to focus on the heartbreak so I wouldn't notice the embezzlement. Sloan wasn't the mistress. She was the red herring. My phone rang. It was Sloan. This time, I answered. Did you hear it? She asked, her voice shaking. I didn't know he was going to do this. Harper, I swear. When he asked me to talk to you, I thought he meant marriage counseling. I didn't know he was trying to frame me as a homewrecker to hide. Whoever the hell is actually pregnant. It's a woman named Madison, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. She is his boss. Oh my God, Sloan breathed. He is using me to hide a workplace affair. Harper, I am so sorry. I should have told you the second he started acting weird. Stop, I said. Do not apologize. You are not the enemy anymore. I looked at the whiteboard where I had mapped out the financial timeline. I had the numbers. Now, I had the character witness. Ethan thought he was directing a play where everyone danced to his tune. He thought Sloan was his prop, and I was his victim. Sloan, I said, feeling a cold, sharp smile touch my lips for the first time in days. He wants you to be the villain, fine. Let's give him a performance. But we are not going to lie. We are just going to use the truth to bury him. What do you need me to do? She asked. Don't block him, I said. Let him think his plan is working. Let him brag, and record every single word. I received the email at 2 a.m, a time when only the guilty and the grieving are awake. The subject line was blank, but the preview text sent a chill down my spine. We are reading the same script. It was signed by Julian Ashford. I stared at the name, the pieces clicking into place like the tumblers of a safe. Julian Ashford was the husband of Madison Ashford, the executive vice president of operations at Merrowline Strategies. He was the husband of Ethan's boss. 12 hours later, I sat in a private conference room at the Four Seasons, flanked by Fallon. The door opened, and Julian Ashford walked in. He looked like a man who was holding himself together with sheer willpower and expensive tailoring. He did not offer a handshake. He simply placed a binder on the mahogany table. It was 3 inches thick, significantly heavier than my own file. I have been watching them for 5 months, Julian said, his voice devoid of emotion. I knew about the affair. What I did not know about was the embezzlement until last week. He slid the binder toward me. I opened it to the first tab. It was a photograph of Madison Ashford blonde, sharp, terrified of aging walking into the Harbor Slate building with Ethan. But it was the documents underneath that made my accountant's heart skip a beat. Madison is not just sleeping with your husband, Julian continued, taking a seat opposite us. She is funding him. As VP of Operations, she has the authority to approve external consulting contracts up to $50,000 without board oversight. She has been approving monthly payments to a shell company called Apex Solutions LLC. I looked at the incorporation papers for Apex Solutions. The registered agent was a generic legal service, but the recovery email address listed for the administrator was a Pierce Proton mail, com. They are funneling company money into this account, Julian said, and they are using it to build their nest egg. But that is not the worst part. He turned the page to a transcript. It was a log of a conversation recorded inside the Harbor Slate apartment. Julian had hired a private investigator who managed to place a bug in the living area. Harbor Slate is not just a love nest, Julian said, his eyes hard. It is a war room. I read the transcript. Ethan, we cannot just leave. If I divorce her now, she gets half the house and half the retirement. We need cause. Madison, the gambling angle is best. We start moving small amounts of cash now. Create a paper trail of withdrawals. Then you tell your family she is spiraling. By the time we file, she will look unstable, and you will look like the saint who tried to save her. My hands shook, not with fear, but with a cold, pure rage. They were not just betraying us, they were actively manufacturing a tragedy to destroy our credibility. They were planning to ruin my name to save their bank accounts. Fallon leaned forward, her eyes scanning the documents with predatory delight. This changes the entire landscape. This is no longer a domestic dispute. Harper, this is corporate fraud. This is a conflict of interest. This is conspiracy to commit larceny. We are not going in with a divorce petition anymore. We are going in with a demolition crew. Fallon pulled out a legal pad and uncapped her pen. Here is the play. It is a three-pronged attack. We execute it all tomorrow morning. She drew 3 circles on the paper. At 9 o'clock sharp, I file the motion for legal separation and the emergency order to freeze all marital assets. That locks Ethan's personal liquidity. He won't be able to buy a cup of coffee without a judge knowing. She tapped the second circle. At 10 o'clock, Julian sends this entire binder to the Ethics and Compliance Committee at Marrowline Strategies. By 10:15, Madison's security clearance will be revoked. She tapped the third circle, looking at me, and at 10:30, we serve both of them with legal notices. We hit them from the bank, the office, and the court simultaneously. They won't have time to breathe, let alone coordinate a lie. Julian looked at me. For the first time, I saw a flicker of solidarity in his tired eyes. They think we are just the spouses, he said quietly. They think we are the baggage they have to leave behind. They have no idea we are talking. I looked down at the transcript, at the lines where Ethan laughed about making me look crazy. I picked up the pen and signed the authorization for the strategy. My signature was steady, sharp, and final. If they see us as obstacles, I said, looking from Julian to Fallon, then today the obstacle becomes the verdict. Monday arrived with the mechanical precision of a firing squad. At 9 o'clock sharp, Fallon filed the motion for legal separation and the temporary restraining order on our assets. It was invisible violence. Somewhere in a server farm, algorithms triggered a lockdown on every account bearing the name Pierce, turning our liquid capital into untouchable numbers. The first domino had fallen, and the sound was deafeningly silent. At 10 o'clock, Julian's courier delivered the black binder to the Ethics and Compliance Department at Marrowline Strategies. I sat in my serviced apartment, staring at the clock, counting the minutes it would take for the paper to travel from the mailroom to the director's desk. At 10:15, my phone rang. The caller ID displayed a generic corporate number, but I knew exactly who it was. Mrs. Pierce. This is Diane from Marrowline Human Resources. The voice on the other end was professional, clipped, and deeply suspicious. We are conducting a standard vendor verification audit. Can you confirm if your primary residence is the registered operating address for a company called Apex Solutions LLC? I did not hesitate. I did not add flavor or emotion. I gave her the raw data she needed to hang him. I have no knowledge of an entity called Apex Solutions, I said, my voice flat. My husband is a full-time employee. We do not run a consulting business from our home. Thank you, Mrs. Pierce, Diane said. The line went dead. The trap had snapped shut. At 11 o'clock, the first wave of panic hit Ethan. He must have been called into a meeting he wasn't expecting. My phone lit up with a barrage of text messages, vibrating aggressively against the table. What did you say to HR? You are ruining my career? Pick up the phone. Harper, this is a misunderstanding. You are blowing this out of proportion. I did not reply. I took a screenshot of the desperate pleas and forwarded them to Fallon with a single caption, evidence of harassment. By 12:30, his panic had curdled into threats. He must have tried to buy lunch or transfer funds to a retainer, only to find his cards declined. The freeze was active. You think this is funny? His text read. You are going to lose the house if you keep this up. I will leave you with nothing. I looked at the message and felt a cold smirk touch my lips. He could not leave me with nothing because he no longer controlled the definition of the word. He was shouting at a wall, unaware that the wall was reinforced concrete. At 2 o'clock, Sloane sent an update from the domestic front. He is calling his mother. She whispered into a voice note, sounding like a war correspondent. He is telling Margaret that you are having a psychotic break and attacking his job out of spite. Margaret is already calling the aunts. She is preparing a united family statement to do damage control. They are going to say you are unwell. They were still trying to write the script. They did not realize the theater had already burned down. At 3 o'clock, the phone buzzed again. It was Julian. It is a bloodbath over here. His text read, Madison is claiming she was coerced. She is throwing Ethan under the bus to save her severance package. And Ethan, he is claiming Madison abused her authority as his superior. They are eating each other alive. Then came the confirmation. HR had moved faster than we anticipated. Julian confirmed that security had just escorted Ethan to a conference room. His company laptop and phone were seized. He was placed on immediate administrative leave pending a fraud investigation. Madison was also asked to leave the premises. The power couple had imploded before they even had the chance to announce their debut. I looked at the phone, at the stream of notifications from Margaret asking me to be reasonable and come home so we can fix you. I decided it was time to stop the spin. I typed a single message to my mother-in-law. If you want the truth, ask your son why he has a draft letter on his computer accusing me of a gambling addiction I do not have. I hit send. I put the phone down and poured myself a glass of water. I imagined the silence that was about to descend on the house in Larchmont Bluffs. The bomb had detonated. Now, I just had to walk through the smoke. I pulled the zipper of my charcoal dress all the way up. It was severe, structured, and entirely devoid of softness. I applied a shade of lipstick that was darker than my usual color, a red so deep it looked like dried blood. It was not makeup. It was war paint. I picked up the single manila folder lying on the passenger seat of my car. It contained no love letters, no tear-stained tissues, only the cold, hard arithmetic of betrayal. Sloane sat in the passenger seat, silent and pale. She was not there to fight. She was there to be the living proof of his lie. Are you ready? I asked, my hand on the gear shift. I just want to see his face when the script flips, she said quietly. We drove to Larchmont Bluffs. The house was lit up like a beacon of family values, a fortress against the truth. I parked right behind Ethan's car. We walked to the front door, which was unlocked, as it always was for family gatherings. I could hear his voice drifting from the formal living room. He was in full performance mode. You have to understand. Mom, Ethan was saying, his voice thick with feigned exhaustion. Harper has been unwell for a long time. She became paranoid when she found out I was planning to leave, not because of an affair, but because we had grown apart. She snapped. She convinced herself I was running away with Sloane. It is a delusion born of jealousy. I stepped into the archway. Sloane remained a few steps behind me, visible but silent, a ghost haunting the edge of his stage. That is a compelling story. Ethan, I said, my voice cutting through the warm, heavy air of the room. The silence that followed was absolute. Ethan spun around, his glass of scotch splashing slightly onto his hand. Margaret gasped. Derek looked from me to Ethan, confused, but my eyes were fixed on Richard, my father-in-law, the man who built his life on contracts and handshakes. I walked to the coffee table, pushing aside a crystal bowl of potpourri, and laid the folder down with a heavy thud. "He is telling fiction," I said, looking at Richard. "This is the ledger." "Harper, don't do this," Ethan said, taking a step toward me, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and warning. "You are making a mistake. We can discuss this in private." "We are past private," I replied. I opened the folder. "You told them I was jealous. You didn't tell them you were expensive." I spread the documents out like tarot cards. "Here is the lease for the apartment at Harbor Slate, $3,400 a month, paid for from our savings. Here is the Visa Platinum statement, featuring the $1,800 bracelet you bought for your boss. Madison Ashford." I saw Margaret flinch at the name, but I wasn't done. I pulled out the document that would end him. "And this," I said, sliding the loan agreement across the polished wood, "is a home equity line of credit for $60,000 taken out against my house. Look at the signature, Richard." Richard Pierce leaned forward. He put on his reading glasses. He looked at the signature, then at me, then at his son. "I was at the dentist when this was signed." I said, "That is not my signature. That is a forgery." The word hung in the air like smoke. Forgery. In this house. Adultery was a sin, but financial fraud was a mortal failure. Richard looked up, his face gray. "Ethan, did you sign her name, Dad?" It's just paperwork," Ethan stammered, his hands raising in a pathetic gesture of defense. "It was a bridge loan. I was going to pay it back." "Harper is just... She is weaponizing private matters to hurt the family." "Weaponizing," I interrupted, pulling the final sheet from the stack. "Is that what you call this?" I held up the draft of the letter accusing me of a gambling addiction. "You were planning to ruin my reputation to cover your theft," I said. "You were going to tell a judge I was an addict so you could keep the money you stole." Ethan opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Sloane standing in the hallway, then back at his parents. He looked at a room full of people who suddenly saw him not as a son, but as a liability. "I didn't come here to win back a husband," I said, smoothing my dress. "I came to win back my name." I turned and walked out. I did not slam the door. I did not look back. Behind me, I heard Richard's voice rise, a boom of thunder that signaled the storm had finally broken inside the house. Ethan had lost his audience. He was alone with the truth, and for the first time in his life, he had no script to save him. The library of the Pierce estate was designed to intimidate. It was a room of dark mahogany, leather-bound books that had never been read, and heavy velvet drapes. Ethan had called this meeting a family reconciliation, a phrase that really meant a negotiated silence. He sat in his father's wingback chair, looking remarkably composed. He clearly believed that his mother had smoothed the waters, that a check would be written, and that we would all go back to pretending nothing was rotting beneath the floorboards. I walked in not as a wife, but as a prosecutor. Fallon Price walked beside me. I carried no purse, no coat, only a laptop and a slim folder. I placed the laptop on the antique desk, the metal casing making a sharp click against the wood. "Harper," Ethan started, his voice dripping with a condescending patience. "I am glad you brought a lawyer. We can finally get some paperwork signed and put this hysteria behind us." "There will be paperwork," I said, opening the folder, "but it is not what you think." I pulled out a single sheet of paper with a raised seal. "This is an affidavit from the notary public who stamped the loan documents," I said, sliding it toward Richard. "He admits under oath that he never met me. He admits that you brought the papers to him already signed and paid him a service fee of $300 to stamp them without a witness. That is a felony. Ethan," Ethan stood up, his face flushing a mottled red. "That guy is a liar. You paid him to say that you are just trying to destroy me because you are jealous. You cannot handle that. Madison is pregnant and you are not. I didn't yell back. I didn't even blink. I simply pressed a key on my laptop. The audio file I had queued up began to play. It was the voicemail he had left for Sloane. If she thinks I am leaving her for you, she will focus on the betrayal. Right. She will cry. She will get emotional. Just play along if she calls you. Be the villain for a few weeks. The recording ended. The silence in the room was heavy, suffocating. I am not the villain, Ethan, a voice said from the doorway. Ethan spun around. Sloane walked into the library. She did not look at him with love or friendship. She looked at him with disgust. Do not drag me into your crime, Sloane said, her voice shaking slightly but clear. I am not your shield. Ethan looked trapped. He turned to his mother, his eyes wild. Mom, they are conspiring. They are twisting everything. We are not done, I said. I turned the laptop screen toward the room and initiated a video call. Julian Ashford's face filled the screen. He was sitting in his own office, looking exhausted but grimly satisfied. Mr. Pierce, Julian said, his voice amplified by the speakers. I am informing you as a courtesy before the courier arrives. Marrowline Strategies has completed its preliminary audit, effective 10 minutes ago. Your employment has been terminated for cause. Madison is currently in negotiations with legal to avoid prosecution, but she has surrendered all correspondence regarding the shell company. Ethan collapsed back into the chair. He looked like a puppet whose strings had been cut. He looked at his father. Dad, he pleaded. It is just business. It is just maneuvering. I can fix it. Richard Pierce stood up. He was a man who valued reputation above all else, a man who had spent 40 years building a name that meant integrity. He looked at his son, and the disappointment in his eyes was colder than any anger. Adultery is a failure of character. Ethan, Richard said, his voice low and vibrating with finality. But forgery, embezzlement, that is not a mistake. That is theft. You are a thief and a fraud. Mom Ethan turned to Margaret. Margaret Pierce, who had spent 30 years protecting her son from consequences, who had covered up his bad grades and his minor accidents, sat frozen. She looked at the affidavit on the table. She looked at the proof that her son had stolen my identity. For the first time in her life, she had no words. There was no social grace that could cover a felony. She looked away. Get out, Richard said. Dad, you can't. Get out of my house. Richard roared, pointing at the door. Ethan stood up. He looked at me, his eyes full of hate, searching for some sign of gloating on my face. He found none. I wasn't happy. I was just finished. I watched him walk out of the library, stripped of his job, his lover, his best friend, and his family's protection. I picked up my laptop. I nodded to Richard, who looked suddenly old and tired. I walked out of the house into the cool night air. I did not feel a rush of triumph. I felt the solid, heavy weight of reality. I had not won by hurting him. I had won because I refused to let him lie. The house of cards had fallen. And now, there was only one place left to go: the courtroom. Fallon secured the emergency hearing date with the efficiency of a general planning a surgical strike. The docket was full, but she managed to squeeze us in for a session regarding the temporary asset freeze and the allocation of marital debt. Specifically, we were there to ensure that the $60,000 home equity line of credit did not follow me into my new life. 2 days before the hearing, I made a brief stop at the house in Larchmont Bluffs. I knew Ethan was staying at a hotel, likely one that accepted credit cards he had not yet maxed out. I let myself in with my key one last time. I did not take any furniture. I did not take the silver. I simply went to the master closet and pulled out his favorite navy bespoke suit. I placed it in a garment bag and hung it on the front door handle. Inside the inner pocket of the jacket, right over where his heart would be, I tucked a copy of the subpoena and the itemized list of evidence we planned to present. It was a gesture he would misinterpret. just as he had misinterpreted me for 11 years. On the morning of the hearing, the doors to the courtroom swung open, and Ethan walked in. My breath caught, not in fear, but in sheer disbelief at his arrogance. He was wearing the suit. He adjusted the lapels, catching my eye with a smug, patronizing smile. He clearly thought the suit was a peace offering, a sign that I was still the dutiful wife tending to his wardrobe, a signal that I was ready to fold. He had no idea he was literally wearing the evidence of his own destruction. The proceedings began, and Ethan's lawyer immediately went on the offensive. He was a loud man with a cheap tie who tried to paint me as a vindictive spouse. "Your Honor," he bellowed, "Mrs. Pierce has engaged in illegal hacking, harassment, and the fabrication of evidence to sabotage my client's career. She is mentally unstable and is weaponizing this divorce to punish him for a simple falling out." Fallon stood up. She did not bellow. She simply approached the bench. "Your Honor, we are not here to discuss feelings. We are here to discuss metadata. I would like to submit Exhibit A, the digital notary log, and the affidavit from the notary public admitting to fraud. I would also like to submit Exhibit B, a draft letter found on the defendant's hard drive, time-stamped 3 weeks ago, outlining a plan to frame my client for a gambling addiction she does not have." Ethan shifted in his chair. He reached into his pocket for a pen and froze. His fingers must have brushed against the papers I had hidden there. I watched the color drain from his face as he realized what he was carrying. The judge, a stern woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, looked at the documents. She turned her gaze to me. "Mrs. Pierce," she asked, "what is your goal with this motion?" I stood up. I kept my hands clasped on the table. "I do not want his money, Your Honor," I said, my voice clear and steady. "And I do not want his apologies. I just want the court to look at the ledger. He created the debt. He forged the signature. I just want the math to be correct. Who created the liability must bear it." Ethan tried to interject, standing up halfway. "I never intended to. I was going to pay it back. I did not mean to defraud anyone." "Objection," Fallon said, slicing through his excuse. "If Mr. Pierce had no intent to defraud, then can he explain the attempted wire transfer of $48,000 to an offshore account exactly 10 minutes before the freeze order was served? The bank blocked it solely because of our motion." The courtroom went silent. Ethan slumped back down. The $48,000 transfer was the nail in the coffin. It proved dissipation. It proved intent. Then came the final blow. The bailiff opened the door for our witness. A representative from the bank walked in, carrying a heavy file. Under oath, he confirmed what I already knew. "We have analyzed the signature on the loan documents against Mrs. Pierce's known signature card," the representative stated. "The slope and pressure are inconsistent. Furthermore, there are signs of tracing. We have flagged this as confirmed identity theft and have referred the file to the district attorney's office for fraud investigation." The judge nodded. She didn't need to hear anything else. She banged her gavel, a sound that rang out like a church bell. "The asset freeze remains in effect." She ruled, "The court grants the motion to sever Mrs. Pierce from the home equity line of credit liability. That debt belongs solely to Mr. Pierce. Furthermore, I am forwarding the transcript of this hearing to the prosecutor. Mr. Pierce, I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney. This is no longer just a family matter." Ethan looked like a man who had been punched in the gut. He sat there, gasping for air, stripped of his assets, his reputation, and his victim narrative. I walked out of the courtroom. The air outside smelled of rain and exhaust, but to me, it smelled like oxygen. I held the court order in my hand. It was just a piece of paper, but it was the receipt for my freedom. I had not won a husband. I had won something far more valuable. I had reclaimed my name, my credit, and the right to write the next chapter of my life without anyone else holding the pen. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please leave a comment below, sharing your location and your thoughts on Harper's Revenge. Don't forget to subscribe to Victoria Revenge Stories like this video and hit the hype button to help this story reach even more people.